October 29 is coming fast, and Massachusetts' new pay transparency law goes live. Employers, you're officially on the clock. Welcome to Human Solutions. I'm Pete Wright. If you're hiring in the Commonwealth or managing a team that stretches across state lines, today's your fast, practical briefing. AIM HR Solutions EVP Kyle Pardo and Senior Director of Consulting Services Dan Baker are here to cut through the noise. What actually happens on deadline day? Whether posting just a hiring range is enough, how to talk to employees about ranges, and how to avoid the most common gotchas. We'll walk a simple 50-day and 30-day countdown. We'll hit the compliance guardrails and show how transparency done right becomes a trust builder that helps you recruit, retain, and strengthen culture, not just check a box. Kyle Pardo, Dan Baker, welcome to Human Solutions. I am so glad to see you both again.
Great to see you as well, Pete.
Good to see you.
This is, Kyle, this seems to be a perennial favorite for you and me. I'm glad to have you guys both here to set the stage now that the clock is officially ticking. So let's set the frame. October 29, it's no longer theoretical. This is a real deadline, and this isn't just compliance for compliance's sake. Done well, pay transparency is leverage, trust with your team, clarity for candidates, and a cleaner story about how decisions get made. So, Kyle, will you start with us with the big picture? Beyond checking a box, why does this moment matter for us, for culture, for retention? Why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you're right. We've been talking about this for a while, right? Since the law was passed last summer. And what's happening now, this is going to be a culture shift for some companies. So it's not just kind of a, one and done, create a checklist, fill out a form, something like that on October 29th. All the work that's going to happen before October 29th is really leading to a culture shift with pay discussions being out in the open and employees maybe asking questions about compensation and companies really thinking about what is their strategy, what's their philosophy. So this is bigger than kind of just a one date, objective or form that you're filling out. It's a bigger shift.
Well, I want to talk about the legal sort of practical side. Dan, what's required and why? I mean, there's a sort of a sense that maybe wait and see was an okay plan before we had a date. Wait and see is probably not the least riskiest plan going forward from here on out.
Yeah, not so much. But there are two components of the law. So the clock has already started ticking. There was a reporting requirement that started in February. So on February 1st of this year, employers that had 100 or more employees in the state of Massachusetts were required to report information to the state. And if they had 100 employees or more and were required to submit EEO-1 reports, then that is what is submitted to the state, the copy of the EEO-1 report. So no additional work, if you will, other than reporting that to the state. In addition to the reporting requirements, and the most important part, I think, and what people are most interested in, is the job posting requirement. That takes effect October 29th of this year. So not to put any pressure on, 7 weeks from tomorrow, this takes effect.
Oh, my goodness.
And there's a different number. So this is all covered employees. So 25 or more employees, not the 100 like you see in the reporting requirement. 25 or more employees in the state of Massachusetts. What you need to do or be doing is to disclose the salary range for every posted position, whether that's external, on Indeed, for example, or internal postings, right? So for every person who is either offered, so for external recruits, obviously, but internally for those that are offered a promotion, or are transferred to a new position or have new responsibilities. Those employees need to know about their salary range. And in addition, any employee who is employed upon request. So this is really what I call a big dot deal, right? So everybody has license, if you will, to ask for their salary range. It's not just sort of the posting in and of itself. Any person that's working for you can ask for that. Now, one question that's come up is, what is the salary range? So the definition of that, according to the AG, is the annual salary range or hourly range that you would reasonably and in good faith expect to pay. So the onus is on the employer to come up with the salary ranges. And we're going to talk more about how to do that and what is the salary range. And the good news, if there's any good news here, is that it's salary only. It doesn't include anything about bonuses or any kind of incentives. It's purely salary.
I want to poke back at that last bit. You said the good news, if there is any good news here, implies a certain feeling that you might have about this change, Dan. What's the bad news? Is it all bad news?
I think it's just a timing thing, and this is a new ball game for a lot of employers. So it is going to create work, unfortunately. But as Kyle alluded to, I think this is really more of an opportunity. So if we sort of think of it not just as a compliance exercise, but an opportunity to tell our story about our pay program, particularly if you have a program that you believe is more than competitive in the marketplace. You've got a real opportunity to reposition and re-educate and get your employees engaged around pay.
Well, that actually, I think, implicitly answers a question that I was going to have for you. Why not just set your range at $1 to $1 million and then set it and forget it and be done? Well, it sounds like there is incentive to be authentic about this in order to build trust internally and externally.
Yeah, and I come back to the AG language, what you reasonably and in good faith expect to pay. So that $1 to $1 million, it would not be considered reasonable and good faith.
We call that first thought, best thought, right? Yeah, no, it's not good, not good. What if, just another quick hit, Dan, what if a company isn't ready on the day? What are the immediate risks for those who are still in wait and see mode? And, what's the triage move in week one?
Yeah, well, if you're not ready and if you've missed the deadline, let's imagine that, oh my gosh, we have 101 employees and we haven't done the filing. Well, if you were doing EEO1 reports already, I doubt you missed a filing. Nonetheless, the penalties, first offense, there's a warning. Second offense, there's a fine of $500. Third offense, it's $1,000. I call those the 3 strikes, right? Because after the 3 strikes, the pokey goes up. The fourth offense is $25,000, right? In addition, there's a grace period for companies. So in the first 2 years, until October 31st or 2027, if you miss something, those fines aren't going to kick in. So there is a grace period if a company hasn't done something. So hopefully that relieves some of the panic if there is any.
Yeah, sure. Kyle, let's connect this to strategy. When compliance updates meet workforce planning, right? Like what are we, or I should say, what should leadership, HR leadership, organizational leadership be thinking about so this isn't a one-off task, but it's truly part of our healthier sort of employment ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. So to build off of what Dan was just saying with kind of warnings and penalties, there is this lead up period, right? So this isn't meant to catch anybody, right? It's meant to get people on the same page and say this is something you need to do, but it's not going to be a one and done. You set your ranges this year and you never have to do anything again. But once you have these ranges set, there is going to help you with budgeting. It's going to help you with recruiting. It's going to help you with performance management. And then every year, you should be looking at your ranges to really kind of think, are they still in line with what you want to pay? Do you need to adjust them a little bit? What's going on in the marketplace? We used to talk about cost of living increases. That doesn't really happen anymore because cost of living has gone up exponentially more than merit increases. But you're still going to need to adjust your ranges and think about, every year, how does it reflect what's going on in your workplace and what you want to pay your employees? So some years might need a little bit more of an aggressive adjustment and others maybe not so much.
How do you talk to current employees about ranges with clarity and respect, especially if you're coming from a culture that has, kept those ranges unpublished, we'll say, maybe not secret, but certainly not aware for everybody to see. How do you tailor that message for different groups on the team, Kyle? What do you recommend?
You have to know your company culture. And so there's going to be a couple of different strategies that you can think about, but it's going to depend on your culture. And I'll give you some examples. If you're an organization that is maybe a large organization, and maybe you have several people in one type of job. I'm thinking of like a manufacturing organization that has a lot of machine operators. You might take the strategy of just posting that range. You might have it listed in your break room, so everybody kind of knows if you can operate this machine, this is your range. If you can do 2 machines, you get a different range, 3 machines, a different range. And that might just be the easiest way to do it. Get it out in the open. People know what to expect if they want to apply for an upcoming opening, that type of thing. Companies that are a little bit more can maybe diverse in their job titles, you might want to have some more either small group meetings to share the information with your employees. Maybe you want to do one-on-one or kind of case-by-case meetings, but you might want to have a different way of approaching it, where you have a conversation, let people know what you value in your organization and how people are rewarded. The one strategy that I don't recommend is kind of I hope nobody asks, let's just kind of stick it in the drawer. We have it done. It's ready to go. But I hope nobody asks any questions about it.
Right.
I wouldn't go
Ostrich
with that
mode.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah, Kyle, somebody asked me that question. Is this like the FLSA issue? Is this going to go away? And the answer, there's zero chance of that happening.
Yeah.
Not the same kind of issue.
All right. So Dan, myth check for us. Can employees talk to each other about pay, and how should employers respond to these new conversations?
Absolutely, they can. And I think you need to get ahead of it. I think, pay transparency is here to stay. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And so the companies that are successful in communicating their pay program to their employees are the ones that are going to be winners. And I can point to some research that's been done. And this was the largest component of the workforce today are millennials and Gen Z, right? They comprise the largest part of the workforce. And these folks are very interested in transparency in general, not just pay transparency, but they're always looking for information. They do their own research on Glassdoor, on salary.com. So they're already out there getting information. And I'm sure many of you on the call today have had questions from employees about their pay. So it's here, and we just need to figure out how to address it. And Kyle touched on company culture. So you should have a culture around communication that hopefully is open and honest, right? And however you communicate and have communicated successfully in the past will stand you in good stead with respect to pay transparency communication. And 68% of that population that I referenced, the millennial and Gen Zs, would switch companies where pay transparency was better for no increase in pay. So pay transparency is important in the minds of the employees. We've just as a bit of a sidebar, we've talked about AI on this platform a number of times, and I have been working on using the new ChatGPT 5 thinking model and learning how job seekers are researching their organizations with this. We've often heard, don't use AI for search. It's not very good for search. It's really, really very good for search. And I think we need to remind folks that in large part, your job seekers are going to come into conversations about pay and everything else about your organization, knowing more than you do. Assume that, because they have access to information more than ever before, and this is just another piece of it. It can, just to pivot off of that last response, Dan, can employers just say, "Hey, look, what do you want to make? Tell me what you want to make, and we'll call it a day." You can certainly ask prospective employees what their salary requirements are. Of course, you can't ask them how much they make, but you can ask them what the what are your expectations about your pay for this job. But I think, by posting our ranges, we're actually being on the front foot. So posting our ranges allows the candidate to see, well, yes, that's a job, at least from a pay perspective, that's a job that would be interesting to me. I've read the posting. Yes, that range seems reasonable to me. I think I'll go interview. Or it could be another one where we're not going to waste anybody's time. Someone is already earning over the max that you're willing to pay, as stated in your range, and so there's not going to. It's going to. I think it's going to bring greater efficiency to the talent acquisition process at the end of the day.
Well, I think the implication of that last question too is another piece, which is, hey, you tell me what you want to make, and we'll just pay you that because we want to have you on the team, even if that challenges our obligations to our pre-stated salary range. Can we just pay someone outside of the range? Do we have? Is there an expectation, or is there room in the law to do that?
Excellent question, Pete. And I've had that from clients as well. And the answer to that question is yes. It's what you reasonably and in good faith expect to pay. So if you happen upon a candidate who more than you sort of fits the bill, and they're going to be excellent fit for your company, an excellent fit for them, it works. Of course, you would make that higher, provided that's the exception and not the rule. So if you post something and you have an exception, it has to be an exception. You have to closely monitor that. So exceptions are fine, but if you post ranges and are always going over them, that's not going to be considered reasonable in good faith.
And I would add to that too, really a caution on pay equity, because if you're going to pay between 60 and 65,000, and you get a great candidate, and they come through and they say, I can only come if you give me 70. Once you make that exception that Dan's talking about, and you say, okay, I'll give you 70. You want to be really careful that it's not going to cause a pay equity issue where you start offering one gender 70 and a different gender 65, or that there's any other disparity in what that decision making is. But if it's that candidate that you asked Dan about comes in and they have an additional certification or additional experience directly in your industry, or something that's really valuable to you, and that's part of your pay philosophy, then you can do that. But as Dan said, really kind of use caution in how and when that's applied.
Things that fall in good faith, I think, that's a broad catch-all,
mm-hmm.
but you better be able to defend it. Okay, so let's move into implementation and sort of looking ahead. Kyle, ownership. HR is the quarterback, but my sense is if our leadership isn't aligned, this is going to stall. It's going to be clumsy and frustrating for a lot of people. What does leadership alignment look like in practice for implementing the kind of change we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the bulk of this work is going to fall on HR, right? Doing the research, putting the ranges together, maybe having the company meetings, but the leadership absolutely has to be involved, because we're going to keep going back to it. It's the culture, it's the conversations, it's the philosophy. And so the leadership team being a part of that is critical right from the beginning. It's always a challenge in HR when somebody might make a job offer and they say, this is what, we're going to pay you. And someone says, I want to make more. And they say, well, HR won't let me give you any more. We don't want HR to be kind of the
always
default,
the bad guy,
the bad guy in the situation. Exactly. And so with leadership on board, and I'm talking about really at the top of the leadership, but really managers at every step of the way, understanding, where this process was developed, what's okay, what's not okay, so that they can support it as well. Because employees will go to their own manager and say, what's the deal with this? Why am I getting paid when I'm getting paid? So yeah, we don't want HR to be out there kind of on an island doing this by themselves.
Yeah. And I think just to piggyback on that thought, what I've seen work very successfully, even though this is certainly in HR's purview, is to have an executive champion. So that champion might be, hopefully it could be your CEO. If not your CEO, then your head of HR, who basically at the beginning of the communication process puts together, and you probably do this kind of communication on other things, puts together a company-wide note or letter, memo, that basically says, this is what we're doing, these are the reasons why, and this is why it's a good thing. So getting that champion to sort of make it viewed as a company initiative, not an HR initiative.
So let's pivot off of that, Dan, and now let's talk about our sequence of events as we roll this out. What are we going to need to do as we begin to think about these? I assume we're talking roles inventory, we're talking external research. Walk us through your process.
Yeah. So the first thing is, since we're talking about pay ranges, we need to build pay ranges. How do we build pay ranges? We have to get pay data, right? So we have to figure out what are these jobs worth in the marketplace and build a set of ranges, right? The other thing you need to consider too, as you're thinking about this, is do you have operations in other states that may have pay transparency laws in effect as well? So right at the very outset, Kyle mentioned multi-state employers. One of the first questions you should be asking is, okay, we know about Massachusetts. What about other states? So we'd have to get on top of that as well. But developing the pay ranges is the first step. And developing an internal process. How are you going to consistently post ranges appropriately, right? Both internally and externally. What's the process if you don't have that already? Most companies have an internal posting process. That's great. How is that going to change, if at all? Another key point is training for managers. And this will depend on how companies want to handle the process. In this much smaller company, I have a client that they want HR to handle the whole thing, the communication, all of that. But it's a very small company. The larger your company is, the larger it's going to be important to get managers trained. Because managers, I've seen this many, many times, are the linchpin to making this successful. So we need to educate managers on how to talk about pay. We also need to consider how to answer questions from employees, of doing Q&A, right? To arm the managers with Q&A in scripts to be able to do that. And having a foundational communication program that teaches employees about the very basics. Why do we pay? How do we pay? What's our compensation philosophy, right? And then once we've done that, we need to, before we kind of go live with this, we need to look at the pay of our current employees within those ranges to avoid some of the issues that Kyle talked about. When you hire external people, you might have this effect called leapfrogging, where new people are leapfrogging over your existing people in the same job. So we want to make sure that before we start to communicate any of this, we look at our people in the ranges. Once we have our ranges, where do they fall, and are there any issues? And Kyle also mentioned pay equity. That's another opportunity to look at how we pay in the females versus the males in those roles. Are there issues with that? And then this is a loop, and this continues. This isn't a one and done. So once this process is rolled out, then it's probably a good idea to have at least monthly check-in sessions. And maybe those are town halls, maybe those are manager meetings, whatever the case may be. So we're getting feedback on what questions people are having that we can respond to them in a consistent fashion.
Can you just give me a specific on the multi-state reality? What are the obligations for employers inside Massachusetts versus outside Massachusetts? Inside Massachusetts, I'm hiring a remote, customer service representative in Maine versus my company's in Vermont and I'm hiring Massachusetts natives to support me. What are the obligations in those scenarios?
If you're in Massachusetts, the employees that would be covered would be those employees that don't necessarily have to live in Massachusetts. So you might have somebody telecommuting from New Hampshire. That person's primary place of work is Massachusetts. So they're working to Massachusetts, even though they're in New Hampshire. If you have multi-state, all of the laws in place as of now generally are around the reporting and the disclosure of ranges. There are some idiosyncrasies within that in terms of what's in and what's out, state by state. But in general, the basic tenets of pay transparency are the same state to state.
Okay. Let's run our quick timeline as we are wrapping up our time together today. We are at, let's say we're going to come up on the 50-day mark, T-minus 50 days. What should be complete by the time we hit 50 days to enactment of the law?
So engaging leadership is number one. So if you haven't done that already, we want to do it now. Right, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Engage leadership because you need alignment. Why are we doing this? Yes, it's a compliance thing, but it's bigger than that. We want to make sure we do it right. Second is clear communications, right? Clarity and transparency. Why is this happening? What are the rationale behind the changes? Compensation philosophy. If you haven't thought about that, why do you pay what you pay? How do you position yourselves relative to the competition? How do we compete for talent? How does that line up with our company goals? Then training managers on the new ranges, how to cover key talking points, how to answer questions, giving them scripts and Q&A to help with that, particularly if they haven't had any exposure to this in the past. And how is that all going to relate to the hiring process, promotions, and performance appraisals? Because it's all tied together. And communicating ranges. So we have to post them, obviously, but on request. So how are we going to respond to the on request change of request? How are we going to respond to that? Finally, be prepared to address questions. I mentioned a monthly town hall. You could have a question of the month. So if you communicate electronically within your organization, you might have a pay transparency communication or question of the month, things like that.
I feel like we started at 50 days the last month. It seems like we're still doing more of the same. Anything in that 30-day mark for our focus for the last month that we have to make sure our I's are dotted, T's are crossed to make sure we have the smallest headache on that fateful day in October?
Yeah, I would say, as I referenced, looking at your current population, I assume before you get to 30 days, you'll have your pay ranges. How does your current population fit within that range? So you have an idea where you might have some issues. So you could be proactive about addressing those. So as you get closer to the date, you want to make sure that by the time you get there, you've done all the communication that you can. And again, this isn't a one and done approach, right? So you're going to go through this and you're going to have to answer questions. You might have to do some re-education, but this is, anytime you're introducing anything new, you can't expect that you're going to have one communication, you're going to talk about it once, it's going to go away. This is here to stay. It's a living and breathing item that we're going to have to deal with on a go-forward basis.
Kyle, big question. Is this a net positive or a net negative for employers?
I hope we can finish with this because I think it's positive. I'm actually really excited about this for companies. Nothing having to do with pay transparency says that you have to change the way you pay employees or that you have to all of a sudden pay people more or anything like that. But if you're paying less than what the market is paying, what other competitors are paying, people are going to start to see that. And so as a company, use this as your chance to market all the great things you're doing. Do you have, flexible work schedule? Do you have a better benefits program? Are people able to work remotely? Whatever that is, so that you're not just maybe thinking about posting what the salary ranges are, but what's your overall package and why do people want to come work at your organization? So you mentioned that people can research it, people can look up companies, and they want to know what does the company stand for. So think about all of that as you're entering pay transparency, but. I've said this before. I think it's going to streamline the recruiting process. I think, the kind of the buyer, if you think of the candidate as the buyer, they're going to come in knowing what the salary range is and be on the same page as you. So I think that's going to save a lot of time. There are going to be some bumps along the way. There's going to be some kind of the initial questions or the initial maybe adjustments that you need to make if you have employees that are out of line. But I think overall, if we come back to this in a year or so, I think it's going to be something that's going to be beneficial to organizations and to candidates and employees. So I think we're going to be in a good place.
Excellent. Thank you both so very much. Check out the show notes. What we're talking right now on our live stream. But the final version of this show will be in our Human Solutions podcast. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. It will also be on our website at AIM-HR Solutions. And in the notes of those posts, you will find links to the pay transparency overview video from the Attorney General's office. And you will also find a link to our last pay transparency conversation back when it was all just in a vague fog of pseudo-reality when we were talking about the sort of what-if questions. And so we encourage you to take a listen to both of those features. Useful information all around. If this has been useful to you, please share it with someone else who's hiring this fall. Let's help everyone in our community level up, and increase transparency for all. It's good for employers, it's good for employees, and it certainly helps to get the word out. Thank you, Kyle Pardo and Dan Baker. It's always a treat to talk to you both. And on behalf of you both, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll see you next month right here on Human Solutions.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.